All right, so now we're going to talk about the types of data. The types of data that you have in a data set is always very important because there's some data that you can do certain operations with, like add, subtract, multiply, and other data that you just can't. And we'll talk about those shortly. So the first thing to talk about when it comes to data is understand population and sample. So imagine that, let's say I wanted to look at all the students at Appalachian State University. So imagine that this circle represented 100% of all students that are enrolled at Appalachian State University at this very moment. And I wanted to get their opinion of the Appalachian State football team. Now, let's say that there's roughly 19,000 students. There is no way on this planet I can ask all of them questions. But what I can do is take a little group of people right over here that I do have access to, and this area here, that is my sample. So that becomes the group of people that I end up surveying, and that is the sample of my particular group of interest. Now, there is always a question about whether you should only, or whether a sample is good enough when you need to do a survey or measurement of the entire population, but that is more semantic. One of the major assumptions that we have is that a sample of the population is representative of the entire population. Another thing that we also need to take a look at is the difference between quantitative and categorical data. So, for example, quantitative data is that data that you can add, subtract, multiply, whatever. So this is like the minimum, the maximum of whatever we want to do. So, like for example, we got the max temperature, right? And we could subtract out the minimum temperature, and this is going to equal that range of temperatures, right? So that is something that becomes valuable to all of us. Another thing that what we can't do though is that let's take for example, you can't take January and subtract out February, right? What does this actually mean, right? We really don't know. Now, a lot of times people will say, well, that's a difference of 1 month. So is this about time? Okay. What about another example? Can we subtract out boys minus girls? Or can we subtract apples minus oranges? Okay. Typically with categorical variables, you put some kind of numerical value to it to give it some kind of meaning. But all of these things make a difference. It's not as easy as what you can do with quantitative data. So it's a very important aspect when it comes to data analytics. So another important area is cross-sectional data. Usually this is at a single point in time. So usually if a survey is taken, that means that survey is taken on a certain date, and that's all that we're evaluating. Time series data is over time, so it's over several periods of time. So a lot of times you might see some kind of chart that will have some kind of trend line that will go like this, right? And that becomes a time series type of data. Traditionally, if you're dealing with time, you're almost always going to be dealing with line charts. So just take note of that. So cross-sectional data is a single point in time. Time series is over several times, right? And time series is frequently dealt with business because it's looking for trends inside what's going on. All right, so here's a good example of time series data. This is the Dow Jones Index since 2006. This specifically only goes up to 2017. I think I was on Yahoo Finance the other day, and I was taking a look at certain trends. So something like this might tell you that the stock market is improving. And if you take a look at this time period right here, we had a major recession. And if you know much about what happened in 2008, we had like an automotive bailout and all sorts of other variations. And then we actually had a change of presidents, and which happened around this time frame. From that time, then the Dow Jones has gone up, and it's still continuing to go up, except for as of I think the beginning of March 2020, it took a sharp plunge, and it's roughly at the same point as it is here. So I think it kind of went up and then dropped. But that's due to the coronavirus and other types of conditions. So also data comes from different sources. One is from an experiment. Usually an experiment, usually you have a situation where you have a group of people. They go through some kind of treatment, and then you would measure those people here. So you take a measurement of people at this point, and they take a measurement of this point, and then you measure those differences, and that will give you an idea whether an experiment has or a treatment has been able to make a difference in people's treatment. Now, a non-experimental study or observational doesn't do anything to manipulate the conditions. They just kind of take a look at what's happening. A really good example is looking at sentiment on social media. That usually has some kind of impact as well. So here's an example of a customer survey. And so a lot of times with these surveys, people will have things, they'll check a box, check a box. And what people do is they take a look at these values here, and they might score these. Maybe they'll give this a value of 5 and this a value of 1. And then they'll start to rank them. And as you get more and more customer data, that data becomes more usable for your organization. So that's where we end up with descriptive analytics. And we'll stop right there and continue on with the next lecture.